The Verdant Collective had three core beliefs that governed their entire civilization. Nature was sacred, interference was heresy, and death by natural disaster was simply the universe expressing its will. For a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel, constructed orbital megastructures, and cracked the code on quantum entanglement communication, they possessed a remarkably medieval approach to forest management. Their settlement on Thornbriar 7 exemplified this philosophy perfectly. The research camp sprawled across a picturesque valley, surrounded by dense coniferous forests that hadn't seen a proper fire in nearly 2 centuries. To anyone with basic ecological training, the place was a powder keg wrapped in kindling and soaked in anticipation. To the Verdant Collective, it was paradise achieving its ultimate destiny. The camp housed 17 different species, each conducting their own esoteric research into Thornbriar 7's unique biosphere. The Kelthari were studying fungal networks. The Praxians were cataloging insect migration patterns. The Zixthar were doing something involving soil chemistry that nobody else understood or particularly cared about. And then there was the human, who spent most of his time staring at the forest with the expression of someone watching a disaster in slow motion. Marcus Reeve had arrived 3 months prior as part of an interspecies scientific exchange program. His credentials listed him as an ecological restoration specialist, which was technically accurate in the way that calling a bomb disposal expert a pressure vessel consultant was technically accurate. He'd spent 15 years fighting wildfires across Earth's western territories, had a graduate degree in fire ecology, and possessed the kind of practical knowledge that academic institutions pretended didn't exist. The Verdant Collective had accepted his application because they needed someone to study post-fire regeneration patterns. What they hadn't realized was that Marcus considered post-fire to be a condition you could actively prevent rather than passively observe. This philosophical gap was about to become extremely relevant. The fire started 60 kilometers northwest, ignited by a lightning strike during the dry season's peak. Within 18 hours, favorable winds and accumulated fuel loads had pushed it into a crown fire that was consuming forest at a rate that would have impressed anyone except the Verdant Collective, who considered it beautiful. Elder Vexnor, the camp's senior Verdant administrator, stood on the observation deck watching smoke columns rise into the afternoon sky with something approaching religious ecstasy. The creature resembled a bipedal mantis crossed with a flowering plant, complete with petals that shifted colors based on emotional state. Currently, those petals displayed serene lavender. "The great cleansing approaches," Vexnor announced to the assembled researchers. "We should prepare our spirits for transition." Marcus looked up from his tablet, where he'd been tracking the fire's progression using satellite data. "Or we could prepare a firebreak." The observation deck went silent. Several alien researchers made gestures that their respective cultures used to ward off evil or stupidity, which in this context were apparently equivalent. "We do not interfere," Vexnor said slowly, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a particularly dim child. "The flame is nature's will made manifest. To oppose it is to oppose the fundamental order of existence itself. The fundamental order of existence is also thermodynamics," Marcus replied, zooming in on his tablet's topographic map. "And thermodynamics says that fire needs 3 things: heat, fuel, and oxygen. Remove one element, you break the triangle, fire stops. It's not philosophy, it's chemistry." A Kelthari researcher, whose name translated roughly to flowing moss over ancient stone, but who went by flow for convenience, tilted its fungal cap thoughtfully. "The human speaks of triangles. Is this a religious symbol? It's a diagram," Marcus said. "Look, the fire's moving at about 15 meters per minute through crown fuel. Winds pushing southeast at 20 kilometers per hour. Given current conditions and terrain, it'll hit this camp in approximately 72 hours. We have time to dig a firebreak, maybe do some controlled burns to create a fuel gap. Vexnor's petals shifted to shocked crimson. Create fires to fight fires. This is madness draped in blasphemy and garnished with hubris. This is tested methodology draped in common sense and garnished with not wanting to die. Marcus corrected. Fire's been part of Earth's ecosystems for 400 million years. We've learned a few things, mainly that forests need fire, but settlements generally don't. Then perhaps the settlement should not be here, Vexnor said primly. Little late for that conversation. Marcus stood, stretching muscles that were already anticipating significant physical labor. I'm going to start surveying for a firebreak location. Anyone who wants to not burn to death is welcome to help. He walked off the deck, leaving behind a collection of bewildered aliens who weren't entirely sure whether they'd just witnessed courage, insanity, or some uniquely human blend of both. The fire advanced with the inexorable patience of geological processes and interest rates. By the second day, it was close enough that the camp's atmospheric sensors were detecting smoke particulates. By the third day, ash was falling like grey snow, and the sky had taken on the apocalyptic orange glow that fire photographers loved, and everyone else associated with impending doom. The Verdant Collective's response was to hold meditation sessions about accepting cosmic will. The Praxians began composing death songs in their 17-part harmonic system. The Zixtha, who communicated primarily through scent, were producing pheromones that smelled like resignation mixed with premium incense. Marcus was digging a ditch. He'd identified a location 300 meters upslope from the main camp, where the terrain offered a natural choke point. The plan was straightforward. Clear a break 15 meters wide, removing all vegetation down to mineral soil, creating a gap the fire couldn't jump. Behind that, he'd clear undergrowth and ladder fuels to prevent any embers from finding purchase. It was textbook wildfire defense. It was also back-breaking manual labor that would have been significantly easier with, say, a bulldozer or a team of workers, or literally any support structure beyond one stubborn human with a shovel and an attitude problem. You understand this is futile, Vexner said, watching from a safe distance as Marcus levered out another root system. The flame will leap your artificial barrier. Nature cannot be constrained by lines in dirt. Marcus paused to wipe sweat from his forehead, leaving a muddy streak. Fire's not magic. It follows physics. Can't burn what isn't there. Your species has such touching faith in control. Vexner's petals rippled with something between pity and contempt. This is why you struggle. You fight the universe instead of flowing with it. We flow with it fine, Marcus grunted, attacking another stubborn shrub. We just prefer to flow in directions that don't involve being cooked alive. Call it a quirk. The verdant elder made a sound like wind through hollow reeds, which was either laughter or profound disappointment. When the flame takes you despite your efforts, will you finally understand the futility of resistance? When the flame stops at my ditch, will you finally understand the utility of topsoil? Marcus shot back. They continued this philosophical debate for another hour, which was really just Marcus digging while Vexner provided commentary, until the human's arms felt like overcooked pasta and his back was sending formal complaints to his central nervous system. He was surveying his progress, roughly 40 meters of cleared ground that looked impressively inadequate against the several hundred meters still required, when Flo approached. The Kelthari moved with the unsettling grace of something that had too many joints in unusual places. This human activity appears to be what your species calls a losing battle. Flo observed. That's quitter talk, Marcus said, though privately he was running calculations about exactly how losing this particular battle might be. The mathematical probability of completing this task alone before the fire arrives is approximately 4%, Flo continued. However, probability increases to 67% with 4 additional workers. I have decided that I prefer 67% to 4%. Also, the fungal networks I study will burn regardless of philosophy, and I have 3 years of data I would prefer not to lose. The Kelthery picked up a clearing tool Marcus had fabricated from camp materials. Please explain the optimal technique for vegetation removal. Marcus felt something unknot in his chest. You just became my favorite alien. I am most aliens' favorite alien, Flo said matter-of-factly. It is because I am extremely logical, and also my cap produces pleasant pheromones when content. They worked together for 2 hours before a young Praxian named Kextil appeared. Praxians resembled bipedal salamanders with 6 arms and an unfortunate tendency toward excessive formality. I have composed my death song, Kextil announced. It is in the key of noble resignation and features a bridge about accepting cosmic inevitability. However, I realize I would prefer to compose songs about other topics. Perhaps surviving and writing more songs is preferable to dying and writing no more songs. That's the most optimistic thing I've heard all week, Marcus said. I am not optimistic, Kextil corrected. I am merely recalculating priorities based on new data. The new data is that I am young and haven't finished my symphony cycle. Close enough. Grab a tool. The Zixthar delegation arrived next. 3 individuals whose names were untranslatable outside their scent-based language. They didn't explain their decision to help, just began clearing undergrowth with methodical efficiency. Marcus suspected they'd simply run the numbers and decided survival had better odds than martyrdom, which was the most Zixthar reasoning imaginable. By the 4th day, Marcus had a crew of 8 working in shifts. The firebreak was taking shape, a raw scar of exposed earth cutting across the landscape like a challenge to the approaching inferno. They worked through smoke that made breathing feel like inhaling campfire, through ash fall that coated everything in grey powder, through heat that turned the air viscous and oppressive. Vexnor watched from the observation deck with petals cycling through increasingly agitated colors. Other Verdant Collective members joined in silent protest, though Marcus noticed their protest didn't extend to actually stopping the work. Apparently, religious conviction had limits when faced with several tons of displaced human stubbornness. The fire arrived on the evening of the 5th day with all the subtlety of an invasion force. The crown fire had dropped into the understory as it climbed the valley slope, which was simultaneously better and worse. Surface fires were easier to fight, but harder to predict. The flames advanced through accumulated fuel like a glowing wave, consuming 2 centuries of unburned material with enthusiastic efficiency. Marcus stood at the firebreak, watching the orange glow resolve into actual flames through the smoke. His crew was positioned along the break's length, ready to stomp out spot fires from Embercast. They'd spent the last 6 hours doing final preparations, clearing every twig, every leaf, every scrap of fuel from the barrier zone. It's not going to work, Vexnor said from behind him. The elder had finally descended from the observation deck, apparently drawn by morbid curiosity. Fire does not respect boundaries. Fire respects fuel gaps, Marcus replied, checking wind direction, and we gave it a pretty significant gap to respect. The flames hit the firebreak's upslope edge like a wave hitting a seawall. The fire had been burning through forest with casual dominance, and suddenly there was nothing to burn. Flames reached across the gap, seeking purchase on the opposite side, and found only mineral soil and very determined aliens with fire suppression tools. Apraxian spotted a small fire where an ember had landed in some mist brush. 6 arms made extremely efficient work of smothering it. A Zixstar noticed flames creeping along an old root system and severed it with a cutting tool that looked disturbingly organic. Flow was everywhere simultaneously, moving with fungal efficiency to address problem spots before they became problems. Marcus worked the line with practiced efficiency, reading the fire's behavior, anticipating where it would probe for weaknesses. Years of experience translated into instinct. He directed resources, called out hazards, made split-second decisions about which spots needed immediate attention versus which ones would self-extinguish. The fire burned along the break's edge for 3 hours, searching for a way through. It found none. Gradually, inevitably, it began to run out of fuel on the upslope side. The flames diminished, dropping from crown fire to surface fire to smoldering patches. By midnight, the main fire front had passed. Small fires still burned in the forest beyond the break, but they were burning away from the camp, pushed by prevailing winds into territory that had already been consumed. The settlement sat in a bubble of unburned ground, an island in a sea of charred landscape. Marcus stood in the firebreak, covered in soot and ash, muscles screaming, lungs raw from smoke, and allowed himself a moment of profound satisfaction. The camp hadn't just survived. It had been defended, saved through deliberate action and applied knowledge. Flow approached, its cap drooping with exhaustion. The fire did not leap the gap. "Turns out physics is pretty consistent," Marcus agreed. "I have learned something significant," the Kelthari said thoughtfully. "Philosophy is pleasant for contemplation, but topology and fuel loads are better for survival planning." Vexnor appeared from the darkness, petals cycling through colors that Marcus couldn't read. The elder approached the firebreak slowly, studying the line of bare earth that had held against the flames. "You have interfered with natural processes," Vexnor said finally. "Yup, you have disrupted the cosmic order. Guilty as charged." And yet, Vexnor extended a delicate appendage, touching the scorched earth just beyond the break. "The forest will regenerate faster now. The fire has cleared accumulated fuel. Nutrients return to soil. Seeds that require fire to germinate will sprout. This is actually beneficial ecological renewal." "That's what I've been saying," Marcus pointed out. "You have forced the universe to conform to your will through application of knowledge and exhausting physical labor," Vexnor continued. "This is fundamentally against our philosophy. So I'm hearing a but coming." The elder's petals shifted to something that might have been sheepish violet. "But I am currently standing in an unburned camp rather than scattered ashes, and I find this preferable. It is philosophically troubling." "Reality has that effect on philosophy," Marcus said. "Look, the fire did what fire does. We just made sure it did it somewhere that wasn't here. The forest is fine. Better than fine, actually. It needed this burn. We just didn't." Kextel appeared, all 6 arms gesturing expressively. "I am revising my death song into a survival song. It is much more complicated because survival requires additional verses. Also, I will need to compose entirely new material about the human concept of digging really big ditches." "It's called a firebreak," Marcus corrected tiredly. "Yes, but digging really big ditches scans better musically." Over the following days, as the fires burned themselves out in the surrounding forest, something shifted in the camp. The Verdant Collective didn't abandon their philosophy entirely. They were far too committed for that, but there was a new asterisk in their doctrine. Something along the lines of nature is sacred and should not be interfered with, except perhaps in cases where specific applications of ecological knowledge allow for coexistence with natural processes in ways that benefit both settlement and ecosystem, subject to review by committee. It was progress, in the way that getting a bureaucracy to acknowledge reality was always progress. Flo started offering seminars on practical fire ecology. Kextel completed a symphony cycle about the human who drew lines the universe could not cross, which was objectively inaccurate, but made for dramatic music. The Zixtel began incorporating Firebreak design into their settlement planning protocols, which they communicated through complex pheromone equations that Marcus couldn't smell but deeply appreciated. Marcus returned to his regular research, studying how the burned forest regenerated. Thornbriar 7's ecosystem was actually adapted to periodic fire, as most mature forest ecosystems were. The plants here had evolved fire-resistant bark, serotinous cones that required heat to open, and root systems designed to resprout after burns. The Verdant Collective had been protecting the forest from the very process it needed to remain healthy. 6 months after the fire, new growth was already pushing through the ash layer, vibrant green against charred black. The forest was renewing itself exactly as evolution had designed it to do, once every couple centuries, with enough intensity to reset the system without destroying it. Marcus stood at the observation deck, watching the regeneration pattern spread across the valley. Vexnor joined him, petals displaying contemplative amber. "Your species is exhausting," the elder said. "Yeah, we get that a lot. You cannot simply accept what is. You must always change, intervene, modify, improve. It is profoundly irritating. It's kept us alive so far." "Yes," Vexnor agreed. "That is the irritating part." They stood in companionable silence, watching new forest push through old ash. In the distance, a Praxian work crew was extending the Firebreak system because apparently surviving once had convinced everyone that surviving twice was worth the effort. Flo was directing operations with the methodical efficiency of someone who had discovered that knowledge application was just as satisfying as knowledge accumulation. "I have been thinking," Vexnor said finally. "Perhaps the cosmic order includes species like yours. Perhaps the universe needs beings who refuse to accept disaster as inevitable. Perhaps that refusal is itself part of the natural pattern." "That's surprisingly philosophical for someone who watched me dig ditches for a week." "I contain multitudes," Vexnor said primly. "Also, I have been reading your human literature. You have a saying about teaching someone to fish. Give a person a fish, feed them for a day. Teach them to fish, feed them for a lifetime. Yes, I propose a corollary. Give a settlement to cosmic flames, lose it for eternity. Teach a settlement to dig firebreaks, annoy the flames indefinitely." The elder's petals rippled with what might have been humor. "It is less poetic but more practical." Marcus laughed, surprising himself. "I'm putting that on a plaque. Please do not. I have a reputation to maintain." But there was something in Vexnor's tone that suggested the elder wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. Progress came in strange forms, apparently. Sometimes it looked like philosophical debates under smoke-filled skies. Sometimes it looked like exhausted aliens with shovels, choosing action over acceptance. And sometimes it looked like a simple line in the dirt, a boundary drawn not in defiance of nature, but in partnership with it, humans doing what they did best, looking at the universe's inevitable disasters and deciding that inevitable was just another problem waiting for a sufficiently stubborn solution. The forest burned. The camp survived. The galaxy gained one more data point in the growing file labeled humans, problematically effective at not dying. And in the grand accounting of cosmic order, That seemed like a perfectly reasonable outcome for everyone except the fire, which had been looking forward to a nice relaxing camp consumption and got engineering instead. Typical human behavior, really. Always ruining perfectly good apocalypses with applied knowledge and inconvenient survival.